My dad grew up and he was part of that Vietnam generation. And my father and my mother both told me early on, you don't ask that question. It's not polite because that's something very personal. And when I got home, I was dumbfounded by how many people just straight up asked me, did you ever kill anybody? The first person who asked me was a little old lady at the Secretary of State when I was getting my driver's license renewed 4 days after getting home. She must have been 70 years old. She looked at me and she said, did you get back from overseas? I said, yes, ma'am, I did. She goes, oh, you were in the Marines or in the Army? And I said, yes, ma'am, I was. And she goes, oh, did you kill anyone? And I was completely shocked. And the thing is, it doesn't matter if you did or didn't. It's some sort of macabre interest that they have to satiate, and they already have an opinion of you. And answering, I think it's like feeding them a steak. So I don't tell them. I say, fuck them, let them figure it out for themselves. When I was growing up in the pre-9/11 era, life was kind of pretty simple. It was kind of thought out. You know, you go to school, you get a job, then you have a family and you go to work. And the thought of that was actually kind of boring to me. I heard that the Marines were the most rigid with their standards. They had the most difficult training and only accepted the best. And I looked at that and I thought that would be something very interesting to do, and I kind of wanted to do something like that. I deployed to Iraq in August of 2006, and that was just before the surge a few months before, and my unit went ahead and deployed into Al-Asad Air Base, and from there we went ahead and convoyed into Fallujah, Iraq. The goal of our deployment was to provide stability and support operations. When you're 24 years old, you don't know what the hell that means, I'm going to be honest with you. What that meant on paper was to do anything possible to go ahead and help the Iraqis transition to providing their own governance and their own security. But that meant so many things. You know, that could have been anything from doing a census to dropping off gear to training Iraqi police, Iraqi soldiers, to having full-blown firefights and taking care of security missions for them. Being an infantryman in Iraq, it's not like World War II. There wasn't a fixed enemy. There wasn't battle lines. It wasn't pitch battle after pitch battle. It was completely different. And someone asked me once, what was that like to be an infantryman in Iraq? It's like being a dog locked in a small cage all day and poked with a sharp stick. You can poke that dog all you want and you're just gonna rile him up. But sooner or later, the dog is gonna get out and that dog's gonna go for your fucking throat. And that's everything about Iraq. You were just always ready to rip open someone's throat. Fallujah had a very nasty, sinister, very mean persona to it. You know, it had a lot of aura around it because it was the site of the second and first battle of Fallujah, major battles in Marine Corps history. You get there and the first thing that you notice is there's just a smell. There's just this odor to the city and it stinks like shit. It smells of raw sewage. It smells like human waste. There's a hint of rotting flesh from God knows what. And it's mixed in with other smells of life, of people baking bread, starting fires, laundry detergent from people hanging up their clothes on a line. It was just very, very surreal. It was not like anything I've ever seen. You could see the remnants of the battles before that had been fought there everywhere. Every building was damaged. Every building had bullet holes in it. Everything in that city was just messed up. There was lots of snipers. There were a lot of IEDs. There were a lot of really small, really fast firefights. Someone would stick an AK around a corner and fire it full burst. You'd fire a few rounds back in just anger. There were several occasions, though, when the insurgents did, no kidding, stand their ground and actually get into fights with us. But those were a lot farther in between. that was something that was really different. I think that annoyed a lot of Marines, that you couldn't just have it out and get into a firefight and release a lot of tension. You had to really wait for it. When it did come, you went ahead and you let go. My platoon sergeant's name was Marcus Golzinski. Mark was from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He spoke with Southern twang. He was funny. He spoke with that twang. He could break any situation. He was known not just on our platoon, but he was known around our battalion as a guy just everybody knew. Everybody wanted to be this guy's friend. And he was smart. He was great at his job. Mark was one of the few NCOs in our squad, in our platoon, that I could go ahead and talk with. And on top of that, he was also a big mentor to me, because I became a corporal and I became a squad leader in very short succession. He taught me how to lead Marines. He taught me how to get things done, how to work with different personalities, how you lead 3 different fire teams instead of 3 individuals. So he provided a lot of the mortar in the brick and mortar construction that goes into making, you know, a really solid squad leader. March 27th, 2007, my unit received orders to go ahead and evict the previous mayor of Fallujah. And so our unit broke off into 4 separate chalks around his house. 3 vehicles were on my chalk, my vehicle, and then 2 other Humvees that were there on a northeastern corner at an intersection that was known as Phase Line Ethan and Phase Line Kathy. Those are just nicknames for the streets. At the intersection there was a mosque that was called the Green Mosque, nicknamed the Green Mosque because of its dome. And this mosque had always been a source of contention with us. It was just kind of known to be a bad place to be. We had gotten in a firefight with that mosque a couple weeks or months earlier. When we got to that chalk and sat down, put in security, sat tight on the objective, we immediately noticed all the people started clearing the street, which was a huge red flag for us. Mark was in another vehicle and he radioed up that he had seen something potentially in one of the buildings next to the mosque. He took a fire team of Marines and went ahead to the building and was about to make breach. As they were running over towards there, I got a call on the radio that we were going to move off the objective in about 5 minutes. I stepped outside the vehicle and I called over to him and I told him, you know, hey, we're off the objective in 5 mics. So before they made the breach, he turned around and stopped. They ran back to their vehicles. And as he ran to the back of his vehicle, I kind of noticed in the rearview mirror, he kind of looked back, and I'm almost 100% positive that he saw something that was out of the ordinary. As he was lifting up the tailgate to put back a breaching tool, we heard 2 gunshots in rapid succession, and then we heard a 3rd gunshot and a moan. And me and the corpsman just looked at each other. Immediately I stepped out of the vehicle, I threw a smoke grenade to provide some cover because I knew something was happening. And he started backing up the vehicle and I started guiding him. Through the smoke, one of my Marines had come running to me. He had blood pouring down his leg. And I noticed he was injured. And I asked him what had happened. And he had told me he had been shot twice. He had been shot twice in the upper thigh. And I asked him if he was okay. He said, yeah, I can move, I can move. He started hobbling, so we got him in the back of the Humvee. I asked him if anyone else is out there, and he said, yes. I said, who? He goes, I don't know. So I started running through the smoke, and when I got there, I saw that it was Mark, and he was lying face down in the middle of the street. As I ran up to him, I could go ahead and see him lying on his side, and I saw a hole in his lower back, just below where his body armor was. And I could look and see on his face he had blood pouring out of his nose and mouth, which was a huge red flag. That was a bad sign. That would mean that the rounds had pierced his lungs, so I knew I had to get him out of there. I started picking him up and dragging him, and at that time I started hearing the snap of rounds. Rounds started coming in. One of the Marines who was in a vehicle closest to me, not far away, he could hear the rounds too. He started returning fire. Moss started firing, so gunfire started going off. I started pulling him, and I couldn't move him because he was so heavy. You know, Mark was a big guy. He was already about 200 pounds. He was kind of a barrel-chested dude, and he could move it. But with his gear on, he must have weighed almost 300 pounds. So I started pulling him, couldn't get him anywhere, and rounds are starting to walk in closer and closer to me. And, you know, for a minute, I just kind of thought to myself, well, you know, if I get hit, well, you know, at least we'll die together. Luckily, one of the other Marines in my squad went ahead and came up, and he actually grabbed Mark on the other shoulder. Me and him together actually started moving him forward, and we pulled him towards the evacuation vehicle. By this time, there was gunshots going off, vehicles were moving, everyone was starting to get out of the area. We took him to the back of the Humvee, and the back had a tailgate. It kind of opened up like almost like a Hertz, and there was a step on the bottom. The first time we tried to pick him up, we just lifted him up using the handles on his body armor, and we dropped him immediately because, again, he was so heavy. So I put my leg up on the rear bumper, the step. The plan was to move him on top of my leg, rest him, and then move him again and get him in the back of the bed. When we put him up on my leg, as soon as we put him on there, he just groaned and he made this noise, and all this blood came pouring out of the hole in his back and out of his mouth. And I'm pretty sure that was the moment that he died. And then we picked him up again because, you know, you got to try, you just can't stop. And we pulled him in the back of the Humvee, and Gutierrez, who was in the back there, he was grabbing him, pulling him, everyone was. And meanwhile, all this stuff is still going on around us. They start pulling him in, and I turn around, I start firing back at the mosque to provide something like covering fire. And then as soon as they got him in, they said, let's go. And we took him to Fallujah Surgical to get him looked at. The ride to Fallujah Surgical, it's maybe like a 5-10 minute drive. It's about a mile away from the city center, just outside the city on a large base. But I mean, I tell you, that was the longest drive of my life. It felt like an hour. You know, we got him there, we pulled around the back, and we loaded him off, and we took him in the back. And our corpsman, Doc Walters, he's just briefing the medical personnel about Gutierrez's injury, because he was back there too. And I asked him, you know, hey Doc, you know, how's Mark, how's Ski, how's he doing? And he didn't answer me at first, and I was like, Doc, tell me, how's Ski doing? And he didn't say anything. And I think that's just when I, you know, kind of admitted to myself that he didn't make it, and he died. The Chem Light party was one of those moments in Iraq that was a lot of fun, because we had a lot of fun in Iraq, surprisingly. We'd occasionally go to these, what we call an OP, an observation post, which was a building somewhere in the city, and it was like a little miniature castle. We'd up armor. It was a bunker, pretty much. And these were big homes, and they had no electricity and usually no water, so the only way to light them was chem lights. One night after, you know, I would say we had a kind of rough week, we decided we would have a little bit of fun. So there was a pretty big box of chem lights, and we started breaking them and throwing them at each other, and pretty soon someone opened a couple more and throw those and throw them back and forth. And, you know, the next thing you knew, we had actually used up quite a bit of chem lights, and it was something like out of Star Wars that we were throwing. I mean, the floor was glowing pretty much from all the chemical lights that we had lit up. And I'm pretty sure somewhere that that's not a responsible or healthy thing to do. And if you are a young Marine or soldier out there, I wouldn't recommend that you use that many. But it was pretty therapeutic to go ahead and throw out a lot of those lights at everyone. It was kind of like a messed up game of laser tag, and it was a lot of fun. That was definitely one of those happier moments that I had with my Marines in Iraq. I can always look back on that one with a pretty fond memory. Do I think we made a difference in Iraq? I still ask myself that. It's been like almost 10 years. I don't know if I made a difference. I don't know if I made a difference for America. I know the people back home sure as hell don't give a shit. Do I think we made a difference to the Iraqis? Yeah, but not in a good way. I don't think they liked it. Are you kidding me? Look at the country now. You know, you can do as much as you want. You can try as hard as you want to help those people, but, you know, you can't make them take it. They're not going to... Fuck you for asking that question. These days, I'm married. I have a son. I work actually for the government, for the DOD as an illustrator. So it's kind of a nice, soothing job. It's pretty relaxing. It's definitely a different change of pace. You know, life's a lot slower now. It's a little simpler. It's a lot simpler in a lot of ways. I guess if you're wondering, do you miss it? You know, every day.